Thank you. I call to order the regular board meeting for the Park Ridge-Niles District 64 Board of Education for Thursday, January 14th, 2021. Carol, would you take roll, please?
Sure. So it's 7:00 p.m. Sanchez?
Here.
Sotos? Salas here. Little?
Here.
Pearl?
Here.
Riles? Biaggi?
Here.
Quorum present.
Thank you. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance then. Larry, I'm fairly certain is not going to be with us tonight for the meeting. So in his absence, I'll try and do my best to lead us. Won't do as good a job as he will, but I'll do it anyway. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thanks everybody. I don't have any remarks tonight to start the meeting off, so I think we'll move right into our public comment section. I know over the last couple of meetings, we've kind of had Dr. Olson and I sort of switching off on whether or not he would do his COVID update during this time or not, but we're kind of officially moving this from an agenda perspective into an ongoing agenda item on each meeting. And so we're putting it, sort of, as you can see tonight, towards the beginning of our agenda right after some staff recognition that we're doing. But we'll turn to public comment on non-agenda item. Before I read our statement, just again for the public who is watching tonight, Dr. Olson is present with some other staff at Jefferson. We still are under COVID guidelines in terms of the number of people that can be present, but if you do wish to address the board in person, you can do so from Jefferson tonight, either for this part of the meeting for non-agenda items or during the meeting for agenda items. You can also use our email address that we've had posted for the last several months to turn in comments again for this portion of the non-agenda item section or the agenda items themselves. And we will entertain those throughout the meeting tonight. So, and I forgot to read one other statement, but I will do that right now, that due to COVID-19, it is prudent to have this meeting remotely instead of in person, but we're following all the guidelines identified by the state. So for public comment on non-agenda item, each speaker is given 3 minutes to address the board. Comments may be made on almost any matter related to the operation of schools. Each person appearing before the board will be treated with courtesy and respect, and the board requests the same in return. In light of the privacy of personnel and student matters, commenters are strongly discouraged from speaking about individual staff or students during public comment. Commenters are instead encouraged to raise such concerns privately with the board president or administration. The board, however, recognizes each commenter's First Amendment rights. Thus, it will not prohibit commenters from speaking about individual staff or students, subject to well-recognized exceptions under the First Amendment, such as obscenity, threats, fighting words, or incitements to violence. So, Natasha, do we have any emails that have come in on non-agenda items for this evening?
We have not received any, no.
Okay, and Dr. Olson, is there anyone present in Jefferson?
There is not.
Okay, then seeing none, we will move on to approval of the meeting agenda for this evening. Are there any board members that have any additions, deletions, or amendments otherwise to the agenda as presented this evening?
I have a small addition. So between items A8 and A9, it would just be a 5-minute update on the last policy committee meeting, and it would fit in logically between 8 and 9.
Okay. So that's an addition. Tony, do we have to do anything procedurally to technically add that in?
Take a motion, a second, and a vote to amend it.
Okay, to amend it and add that in. Okay, so Carol, I'll take yours as a motion. How's that? I will take what you just stated as a motion. Is there a second on Carol's motion to add that in?
Second.
Denise has the second. Okay, is there any discussion on adding that in? And I assume nothing from the public? Okay, so we'll take a roll call vote as we do for all remote meetings like this under COVID.
Okay, Biaggi?
Yes.
Little?
Yes.
Salas, yes. Pearl?
Yes.
Sanchez?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great. So again, Carol, you want to do that after we do the press issue 106, but before we do the 4.180?
Right.
Between
it
those
just
two?
flows,
Okay.
Correct. It flows right after A8. So
Okay.
that would work.
Great.
Rick, I just had one comment.
Sure.
Just to bring it to the board's attention. If Tom does not show up tonight, and it sounds like Larry won't be here either,
Yep.
we have on A4, which is related to A5, the custodial contract. The approval of that custodial contract is going to be on an emergency basis under the school code, which requires 6 votes, votes of the board to pass that. So if we don't have 6 board members by the time A5 comes up, you'll be unable to approve that contract tonight.
Okay, I have unilateral discretion though, like to kick that down the agenda, right?
Right.
For
Oh,
instance,
yes,
if
yes,
Tom comes
right.
to 9 o'clock or something, like we can kick it there.
Exactly. Yep.
All right, so we'll just monitor that. And Eric, I don't know, maybe would you mind seeing if you could text Tom and just
Sure.
get his ETA so we know?
Sure.
Great, thank you. All right, anything else from the board on the agenda itself? Okay, great. And I asked you to do that, Eric, just as I turned the mic over to you. Sorry for,
Right.
for your next thing.
Yep. All right, thank you. As the board is aware, our nurses and custodians have been 2 extremely important groups of employees as they have guided the health and safety in both the procedures we've put into place and their adherence to those procedures to ensure our buildings remain as safe as possible during the pandemic. Like many of our positions, we clearly couldn't have done it without them. I want to extend my thanks and appreciation to each of our custodians and nurses for their dedication to the health and welfare of all those who attend District 64 schools. I'd now like to introduce Jason Borst, our Interim Director of Facility Management, as he wanted to add a couple comments as well.
Yes, I just wanted to state that, coming from a head custodian position, I know what the guys are going through, and they are very dedicated to make sure the buildings are safe and clean. Every single morning, they're working really hard, and I just want to congratulate each and every one of them for the hard work they have been doing and are continuing to do.
Thank you. I'd now like to introduce Margaret Tamari, our head nurse, and she had some additional comments as well.
Thank you, Dr. Olson. Thank you, board. Thanks very much for taking the time to acknowledge our nursing team. As nurses who work in this educational setting, we sometimes feel like fish out of water. The focus is on education while we work in the background to support health needs of students and staff. Readily available hospital resources and daily interaction with other medical professionals are not part of our daily work setting, and sometimes it feels as though we're practicing in isolation. But this COVID-19 pandemic has shifted the world's focus onto health. Every activity our students and staff now engage in is guided by principles of infection control, mitigation, health stats, education about quarantine and isolation, and so on. Health and safety has moved to the forefront in our daily lives. I want to share with you that my nursing colleagues in District 64 quickly rose to the new challenges that this COVID-19 brought last spring, and they have worked diligently since that time to make sure our students and staff have a safe, healthy environment to learn and work in. These women are incredibly dedicated, caring, knowledgeable, hardworking group of professionals, and they truly love what they do. Our school community is extremely fortunate that these particular nurses have chosen to make school nursing their calling and District 64 their home. Thank you to my nurses.
Thank you, Margaret.
You're welcome.
And I'll turn it back to you, Rick.
Thanks, Dr. Olson, and Margaret and Jason, thanks to both of you and to the staff. I think during this time, there's been so much focus as to what's going on in the classroom and our teachers and aides. And I think we haven't taken enough time to thank our health staff and our custodial staff, because you guys, the world's changed for both of you and your team pretty dramatically. So we really appreciate everything that you're doing from a leadership standpoint and for your team members as well too. So thank you on behalf of the board. Okay, Dr. Olson, I think you've got a COVID-19 update for us now.
Yes, so I have a handful of topics in this section today. I thought I'd start with just talking about the current metrics. So, Niles positivity rate actually dropped below 5% recently. Now it's just over again, but they saw really good numbers going there for a little bit of a stretch. And Park Ridge has been declining over the past week and is now below 8% as well. In terms of new cases per 100,000, Park Ridge remains in the 300s, and Niles has now climbed over 400. So I also thought that because we are putting emphasis on a new metric, that it would be good just to kind of talk through a little bit of the process. So if we are below 8% positivity and we are below 175 new cases per 100,000, and we are below that 3%, I'm not calling the Cook County Health Department and asking for suggestions and advice. We don't need to do that. If we were to go over that number, that would signify that now we're starting the process of having the conversation and considering if we would need to close schools. And so now what's going to happen is that because we're over, like for instance, in number of cases per 100,000, then I'm still regularly checking in with Cook County because we're above that number. If we were to go above 3% of staff at a given building, that would also prompt me to contact Cook County and to be able to talk through what our situation is. And while those are some of the key things I'm looking at, Cook County asks a whole series of questions and things that they're looking at in terms of what's going on in the county, what's going on in hospitals, and then they get very detailed with us in terms of who are these individuals, is there any evidence of spread within the school, and we engage in that conversation going along. What I've explained with staff is just because we hit that 3% doesn't mean that automatically something's going to happen, with the exception of that the conversation has begun. And just in communicating with Cook County throughout this year, I understand, where they're going and what questions they're going to ask us as we prepare for this. And one of their breakdowns is going to be, well, let's say you're now over 3%. Well, let's talk about who those staff members are, what their roles are in the school, what was the contact tracing in terms of their impact on others, and all of those pieces go into the decision-making if we had to move to close a school. So I just want to signify, again, to everyone that hitting these benchmarks only begins the conversation, and it's a matter of putting all the data together to make a final conclusion of what we should do at that time. I also thought it would be good to talk a little bit about the lanyards, as that is a new procedure for us now. And I've had a couple questions from parents of, why are we doing this? Like, what's the point of it? And as we've done since the beginning of the year, we're always reviewing what are our practices, what are our procedures, and do we have everything in place? The state was extremely vague in this area in the beginning of the year of how parents and staff would do health certification. And so a lot of districts just kind of made up their own plan at the time. And while all of our plans look somewhat similar, there are differences across the board. Well, as we were looking at our plan, we didn't feel that it was good enough to be able to signify that students are actually coming to school and they have some kind of visible piece that shows my parent has checked me this morning, and that this would be a better procedure than just saying that because the child showed up, that automatically means that. We hope that by having this reminder each morning, because we do believe our parents are doing it, but we also know that we all get busy in the morning, or we all have, hectic times. And do we then end up accidentally getting out of the practice for a couple of days? Well, with that lanyard, it's another symbol to sort of say to the parent and the child, we need to make sure we do this before we go to school today. And as we talked about the various ways to have some kind of visible indication, we felt that the lanyard worked really well, because it's clear and bright and you can see it, but also for the fact that as students are going into the building, it's a very quick, easy thing for staff members to see so that we can keep those lines moving in. Tony, anything else to add to that?
Just very quickly, the state guidance is a two-part test. It's self-certification and verification. And that's where the lanyard's coming in. School districts have struggled with a trying to find a simple way to verify that people have done the self-certification instead of having to pour through records or pour through Google Sheets and then chase down who didn't verify. So this has been one of the best practices that has come out over the year of having something visible so that we could see right away, verify that the self-certification was completed.
Thank you. Next, I wanted to touch on the vaccine. So you may be aware, well, I know the board's aware, that there is categories of who's going to receive the vaccine and when. And category 1A was healthcare workers. However, there are a couple of our groups that actually fit into 1A. So our nurses, our speech pathologists, our occupational therapists, and our physical therapists, they can go and receive the vaccine as part of Group 1A, and many of them have already signed up and are already in the process of doing so. And then educators are in Group 1B, and we would be the next, but now we're talking about all the other people that are within the system. I have been hearing anywhere from February to May as to when that might happen. But very recently, I think there's a lot of positivity that we could really see this in February. So I'm very encouraged by that, that we would be able to get to that point that quickly. But obviously, it's just waiting for the information each week to kind of see what the next step in the process is. And then I'm communicating both with the health department in terms of the number of vaccines I need and with District 207, just to ensure that we're covered in case something were to happen. So I just wanted to let you know that about the vaccine. And then lastly, a couple of parents have started to ask me, well, what about next fall? Do you know what the situation is going to be next fall? Now, I will say I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have some secret information that the rest of you don't have. But in all the conversations I'm in and everything I see, I believe that we will be fully in person in the fall. I just think that we might still have some procedures in place. Maybe people still have to wear masks. Maybe there still is mandated hand washing or those kinds of things. Is that a guarantee? Of course not. I'm just saying that based on the information that I have right now, that's what it looks like. Then the next conversation is, could you see that happening within the school year? And the answer to that is yes. I think a huge component of that is the vaccine, to see how long that whole process takes and where we are with it in terms of the distribution. There's also some thought around that with a new presidential administration, they just might have different practices, philosophies, procedures than the previous one. So we're also waiting to see, are some of these things going to change? And that might be additional information that we would have at this time. Obviously, right now, we're focused on getting the kids back in school next week, to have everybody that's interested to come. And then, as I've said previously, we want to start continuing to add more and more students that are coming 5 days a week. And the following week, on the 25th, we now have our next group of students that are coming and able to do it 5 days a week. And if you remember, if a parent is interested in switching from hybrid to remote, they can do that at any time. If they want to switch from remote to hybrid, they need to inform the principal before the first of the month. That allows us to be able to set a schedule and kind of know exactly where we're at in terms of how many students are coming. So once we get to February 1st, now we can start seeing what are our further space constraints and so forth. How can we continue to bring students in? I will share with the board that the principals are reporting there have been a lot of changes in terms of parents, over the last couple of weeks with just, the most up-to-date information. And that's going both ways in terms of hybrid and remote. So once we see our percentages, again, of where we are, then I'll give the board an update as well. So those were the topics that I had for tonight, but I can certainly answer questions if there are any.
Any questions from any board members about Dr. Olson's presentation? Dr. Olson, I have one, and it goes back to the lanyard issue, and I guess it's kind of a two-part question, or at least it's got goes in two different directions. But I've heard from folks, and I know I shared this with you earlier in the week, that I've heard from folks that have concerns about the lanyards. One, I think there was the question as to why, which I think you addressed tonight, and as part of that why question, I think there's some folks who are asking, well, 207 is doing something as well, but it's not lanyards. It's a like a 3D barcode type based student or parent scans the barcode, it pops up a website which you answer 3, 4, 5 questions as you're walking in the building, and then that's logged somewhere and you move into the building at that point. And that seems to work quite well for 207. And I understand why you wouldn't have a second grader necessarily. A second grader isn't even going to have a mobile phone necessarily, or that you would want them, to do that. But why the parent couldn't be doing something similar from home that way that's immediately reported to the district. And I hear the visibility again. I'm relaying the question more than anything else. Because I think ultimately it gets to part two of my question or comment, is that I think there's some folks that are concerned it's a little big brotherish to have a kid walking around with a lanyard. And if the district's just doing that right now to say that this is a visible sign off by the parent that my kid doesn't have symptoms, that's great. But as the next step that we put, my kid did or didn't have the antibody, my kid did or didn't have a vaccine, we do or don't keep a gun in our house, my mom or dad voted for so and so, you go down the line of crazy questions that could be asked with this. So is the district committing that that's all that this is for the reporting of symptoms right now, and we're not going past that? Or is this the beginning of a slippery slope?
Sure. So to answer your first question is, obviously we can continue to look at how different districts are operating and see if that works for us. The process that you described at 207 is not a common practice among elementary districts. And so, as we consult with others and of what the plan would be, as we looked at our pre-K 8 students, we just felt the lanyard was the easiest way to go. Obviously that we could move to a system like that. There always is, a process of, then you have to have personnel that are going over that data, acting on that data, and all those pieces too. In terms of your second part is, I would believe we would use the lanyards, COVID would be over, they would go away, and we'd never talk about another thing again. We don't have any plans to continue this in any other way. I had a parent ask me if there are sensors inside them, and are we tracking students, and there's nothing electronic about it. If you want to put it in the washing machine, go ahead. We don't have any other reason why we would use it. I also had the question, are you planning to do something like this for the vaccine in terms of who's been vaccinated in the school and who hasn't? And the answer is absolutely not. We would not do anything like that. Does that help?
That's great. That's great to hear. I think I shared this with you, that my daughter, who is at UW-Madison, they're rolling out a mobile app, which not only tracks all of that, you're required to take the test, I think, twice a week, and they can literally lock you out of buildings on campus. But they're doing contact tracing to the point where if you're within a certain vicinity of someone who has tested positive, your phone goes off. And you're alerted that there's a person standing 6 feet from you right now that's tested positive. I mean, it's a little wild. So I'm glad to hear. I knew we weren't doing that to that level, but I'm glad to hear we're not.
Dr. Olson, I want to ask a question about maybe Tony could speak to this, the verification part. The lanyards are meant to verify that a parent has done the things that we've asked them to do before they send their kids to school. And I guess I'm just a little concerned about the lanyard. It's so easy to just put it around your neck and run out the door without really verifying that a parent has done those things that we're asking them to do. A lot of schools are having, forms filled out and dropped off that morning. The parent has to fill out that form. Temperatures being taken before a child walks into school. Do we have any of those concerns that, kids just going to slip the lanyard on and go to school, and those things aren't going to happen? And would it be? How much more difficult would it be for us to do temperatures and that sort of thing? I just want to know if you could speak to that.
Sure. So I would say we're definitely always concerned, with all those pieces, as you mentioned. I think that what I would say is that we were very successful in October and November when students were attending and they were not wearing a lanyard at that time. So I would hope that that would continue. We acknowledge that probably, not every single parent in the district and every single staff member is guaranteed every morning that they're checking themselves. But we continue to push that message because we think that's extremely important for us to be able to keep schools open. We hope also that it's in parents' best interest to be able to do this, because if we start spreading in school, we're going to have to start closing them. So this is the way that we can stay the most healthy, is by parents, completing this check each morning. One of the things you brought up was temperature checks. Temperature checks for all students and staff is something that we've talked about and considered. Really, the difficulty comes in is just the number of students that need to enter our building, the number of students that would probably have to wait in lines outside to be able to get in, because we don't have the space in the school to bring everybody into a central location. So especially with the winter, there could be long lines outside of students trying to get into the building. It is something that we continue to talk about. We just don't think it's a measure that we have to go to at this time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Dr.
Just wanted
Olson
to
still
note that,
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Carol.
so Tom Sotos is here. We have 6 members present. And another related thing is we have 5 meetings that we know of the Pandemic Advisory Committee. The next one is next week. Do we have a board member attending that?
Board member is not currently signed up, I don't believe.
Okay, there's that. And then with this committee, is the committee going to be discussing topics related to the possible full reopening in fall? Because it seems like there's a lot to be discussed.
Yes.
With that.
So I don't mind giving an update. So with the Pandemic Advisory Committee, as I've talked to the board a lot about, is there's so much information that we have to give them to be able to understand and be able to, have input and give advice into the decisions. So, it took us a lot of time in the beginning to sort of get everybody caught up. And then even though we've only been meeting every 2 weeks, there's still a lot that's happened within those 2 weeks that we further update. And now, at our last meeting especially, but a little bit at the previous one, they're now starting to engage in the conversations. And so also at the time we started the Pandemic Advisory Committee, we already had said January 19th was going to be when we returned, unless we were able to do it sooner. So a lot of those decisions had already been made. But now what the committee is going to start talking about is what are the decisions in February and in March and in May and in June, as well as next year as those come in. And then now I will also give to the board sort of regular updates of sort of what they're saying and what they're recommending, and whether I'm also recommending that or not, so that you know what the input is that's coming from this group. But I think it has been good with Carol and Denise attending, and the board's certainly welcome to continue to do so.
Okay. Dr. Olson, anyone yet come in publicly to
No.
do? Okay, so there's no one there. I'll keep asking it through the night, or you can give me the high sign if there
Sure.
are people. And Natasha, anything that's come in electronically on this conversation?
Nothing at all.
Okay. Anything else from the board then for Dr. Olson? Okay. Thanks, Dr. Olson, for the update.
Yep.
All right, so we are moving on to a few resolutions that we have tonight related to the budget, and one for custodial contracts. So Luann, why don't I turn that over to you to go over our first resolution regarding the budget.
Thank you, Rick. So it's that time of year again, right after the holiday break, that we start working on next year's budget. And we have already started talking to Lori and Leanne about their budgets and MJ. So I just need approval. This is just a formal process for the board to allow me to begin preparing the budget for next year.
Does the board have any specific questions for Luann as they kind of, her team embarks on this right now? Otherwise, this is kind of a bit of a pro forma motion that we have this evening, but anything specific you want to talk about tonight on the budget? Okay, you're getting off easy, Luann. All right.
She
So-
still
so-
has a couple more items.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Not, yeah,
Yeah.
right. But this one, I mean, you're getting off easy on.
Yes.
Okay, well, anyone want to read that motion into the record?
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, adopt resolution number 1259, directing the chief school business officer under the direct supervision of the superintendent to begin preparation of a tentative budget for the 2021-22 fiscal year in accordance with board policy 4:10, fiscal and business management, and the Illinois School Code 105 ILCS 5/17-1.
Thanks, Denise. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so Rebecca's got the second and Denise has the, what was that? Was that Tom? Oh,
Yeah,
I heard-
I seconded it, but you didn't catch me in time.
Okay.
So that's fine.
Yeah, I'll get you the next time, Tom. All right, so any discussion on this motion? Okay, and nothing from the public? Okay, we'll take a roll call.
Nothing at all.
Okay, Salas, yes. Little,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Biagi,
Yes,
Sotos,
Yes.
motion carries.
great, thank you. All right, Luann, we've got the next one to talk about, and that is in relation to the custodian contract.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk about, I did the contract part of this, so I'm just going to talk about it briefly and then turn this over to Joel and to Jason to talk about it. The reason we're bringing this, like we hire sub teachers and that, and we don't have to do any resolutions or anything. The reason we're having to do this is that probably about 10 years ago, they put this third-party instructional services statute into the school code. And what this does is it protects the district's custodians and like bus drivers from the district deciding, hey, I just want to now, I have all my own bus drivers, but you know what, I want to use Lakeview. So I'm just firing all of you and we're going to hire Lakeview. So this has prevented that from happening anymore in school districts. So in order for us to use the open works, normally we would be going out to bid for this work. So we would be doing a formal bid and everything. But because we're in an emergency situation, we can pass this resolution with 3/4 of the entire board. So we would need 6 votes to allow the district to start using sub-custodians on the second shift to help clean the schools when we are short on staff, or if we run into situations where we need to do a deep clean in the building, it would be great to have more hands on deck for that. This is only for a 3-month period of time. If we continue to need them after the 3-month period, obviously way ahead of then I'll be talking to James Levy and seeing what our options are for trying to extend it for another 3 months. So we're not hiring any of these custodians. They would be working second shift. You have the contract and then the amendment that we put together, which they have agreed to our amendment, so which is great. So I wanted to turn it over to Jason and to Joel because they were much more involved in negotiating the contract and working out what needed to be done.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Luann. And I'd like to, before we start, just as she said, I really want to thank Luann and James Levy because, hardest part of this is getting all the nuts and bolts and the, the minutia of those contracts settled, and it takes a lot of time, and they did a great deal of work. So I really appreciate that. So as Luann said, we're looking at OpenWorks as a third-party company to come in and support our custodians. As we just talked about here at the beginning, our custodians are critical parts of our building. If we don't have enough of them on a daily basis to keep the building clean during this COVID time, we're in big trouble. And we've been lucky enough, the board earlier in the year allowed us to hire additional people so that we could move to extra support during the day, but still have our full load at night. And that has been critical for us so far, because what we found is our custodial staff, just like our teachers and everybody else, they get sick, things happen, and we're going to have people off. What we've been trying to do is have backup plans in place so that in the event that we really get hard, we can still have business as usual in our schools. So what we've been doing is a couple things. So first one is Jason and I, and this started a little bit with Jason and Ron, previously, we started to recruit and create our own substitute pool of people who would work directly for 64, just like substitute teachers. We would call them, they would come in, hey, we need you tonight, we need you to cover a vacation, whatever the case may be. Those are people who would not work for OpenWorks, but again, would be just like we do with our substitute teachers. They would be a pool of people that we use. And right now we have 18 people that we're looking at who've applied already, and Jason and I are in the process of building that pool. So that's really kind of the first group we're really going to try to look to work with to be our support. But we can't always guarantee that A, the subs that we're looking at are going to be available, and B, depending if we were really to get hard, how many people we would really need in a really difficult situation. So what we're trying to do is have that additional backup plan of OpenWorks in the event that we had, as Luann said, we just needed additional people for deep cleaning, or we were really hit hard and we needed extra people. They would supply us with nightly custodians, and we only pay for what we use. So tonight, if we only need 2, we're only going to get charged for 2. Next week, if we don't use any, we're not going to get charged any. And again, our goal is that we don't have to use OpenWorks. We're hopeful that, through our own process, that we can fill our own openings. But this is an additional backup plan so that anytime during this school year, there will be no issues for our students and staff in the safety of our schools. Everything will be cleaned, it will be cleaned thoroughly, and nobody can worry about it. So this is, again, is really just making sure that we're covered in this unique and difficult time. And Jason, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. He explained it exactly what the plan is, and it is just a fallback just in case, something catastrophic does happen. So it's not like we could be using them, constantly.
Or at least we hope not anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Again,
I have
we're asking the board to consider this contract. And as Luann said, and I just want to reiterate, this is only for 90 days. It doesn't automatically renew. And again, we just view it as a safety net for our district.
So I just have a quick question then. So again, I understand, I'm assuming the statute only allows this to be for in place for 90 days, and then the board would have to take additional action to renew it if they wanted to do that, or under the statute. But so am I to understand though, Joel, that your normal process that you go through, that we'll call them subs, like the teaching subs, the custodial subs, you don't need board approval for that. It's just this third-party organization that the statute permits, that normally the law permits you to bring in subs on a regular basis when needed for custodians. Okay.
Yeah, basically with this, it's a service contract that would typically be subject to bidding. But there's an exception as long as you don't exceed 3 months.
Okay.
Rick, on our sub-custodians, I just wanted to point out that when we hire them, Joel does put them on the personnel report, so you do see names when we hire people.
So you're saying though, but you're not saying like you're hiring them, I'm talking like a night, right? Like, oh, we've got a guy out sick for 2 days, so we're hiring somebody. We don't put that on the personnel report.
No.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, you're only talking about if somebody who's out for a semester maybe, or a trimester or a year or whatever it is.
Right.
Okay. But again, both of those are permissible without board approval.
Yes.
well, I shouldn't say that. I guess the longer term one has to be approved by the board because it's a longer term hire, but the regular sub for one-offs, you don't need board approval for that, just for this contract.
Right.
Okay.
Tony, could you speak to the limitation of liability paragraph in the general terms of the contract? What, like,
Probably, quite frankly, I'm not the one that reviewed it.
Okay.
James Levy did, so I probably can't.
okay. I just want to know what, what our liability is. Somebody gets hurt on the job. It seems like it's kind of limited to whatever their insurance coverage is, but.
Yeah, I did see some language in there, especially around hazardous situations where we did limit the liability. They're not your employees, so they wouldn't be subject to workers' comp.
Okay.
And they do have to have their own insurance.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions from the board about conceptually? I mean, I guess we can get the motion on the table too, and then if there's specific things about the contract, we can go there. But anything just generally we want to talk about before getting into the nuts and bolts, if at all?
Can I just ask a quick question, Rick?
Yeah, sure.
So Joel, I appreciate you looking ahead on this, thinking if we, really need to get our buildings clean to keep them open. And it's hard to know what the cost is going to be because you don't know how much you're going to use them. Are there other school districts, who have contracted with this company?
I'm not familiar with any other districts that have. I know Ron, prior to this, actually started the search for somebody who would work with us because one of the critical things, this isn't like the sub companies that I brought for the substitute teachers. There aren't a lot of substitute custodial companies who specialize in providing custodians for school districts. So these are companies that, put people out into, they clean office buildings, things of that nature. And so they usually are signing longer contracts with people. So I know Ron did a search to really find somebody who was willing to work with us and provide these kind of one-offs for us. And I know there weren't a lot of companies out there to work with. So I'm not aware of any others that work with, and I'm not saying there might not be, I'm just not aware of them.
Okay.
All right, if there's not any other general questions, then I'll entertain the motion for approval of this contract. And then if seconded, we can talk more about it.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the resolution authorizing the award of a custodial contract to Open Works.
Thanks, Denise. Is there a second?
Second.
Fred's got the second. Denise had the motion. Great. Are there any questions now, again, either general or specific on the contract itself or generally in the concepts that we haven't already covered?
I have a question. So Joel, you mentioned that Ron did a search for the company. Do you know of any other things that were done to find this company or how exactly we found them? This is, an Arizona company. The officers are in Arizona. Is there any other information you have about how this company was found?
Yeah, I can't give you a lot, Carol. I'm sorry about that, but I do know that when Ron was out there, he did call a number of companies. And, there were a lot of people, quite honestly, that turned us down and just said they weren't interested in this. This isn't what they do. So I can't specifically tell you how Ron linked up with this one in particular. Again, I just know there were a large number of them that he did call and did try to talk to. But how this one ended up on his plate, I'm sorry, I'm unaware. Luann, or do you know by any chance?
No, I'm not sure, but I am looking through some of the other documentation they sent to us, and they do the cleaning for Bright Horizon, early education, and preschools. They have listed Primrose Schools, a university, Goddard Schools, which are private schools, along with a lot of large clients like CVS, Pepsi, FedEx. So, but those are the schools that they have listed. The one thing that we find with a lot of companies, and I can tell you this before because we have looked even prior to COVID at outside firms, not just in this district, but in my last one. And the problem is they want you to sign a contract, and now I'm going to have Joel all year cleaning, right? They don't want to operate more like where we need a sub just for a night. They want to operate maybe more like a manpower where they're, contracting people out to a place. And so this was attractive option for us because we can hire them on an hourly basis with a minimum of 4 hours. And they are subject to everything. They have to do a background check. I mean, FBI fingerprints. So they have to go through anything that we would expect of any contractor.
Carol, you mentioned Arizona. When I Googled them, it looks like they have a local office in Downers Grove. So I think they're a local, there is a local part of them.
Right, they're registered to do business in Illinois. I was just talking about the officers.
So it seems like the risk is pretty low here. I mean, you could literally use them one time, and if it's a complete abject failure, go back again, and there's, no real risk there since we're not locked into anything.
Right.
Right.
Correct.
All right, any other questions from the board? So in light of Larry's absence tonight, in order for this to pass, it does need to be unanimous from the board. I'm not suggesting everybody vote yes. I'm just saying if it is not a unanimous vote, then the motion will not pass. So for whatever that's worth. So Natasha or Dr. Olson, are there any comments from the public on this issue?
I have not received any, no.
Okay. All right, if there's nothing else from the board, then we'll take a vote.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Little,
Yes.
Sotos,
Yes.
Salas, yes, Biagi,
Yes.
motion carries.
Okay, that was unanimous. So thanks, everybody. All right, so we're moving on to A6 tonight, which is the mechanical units for the Carpenter project. So Luann, do you want to walk us through that?
Let me just scroll to it.
Sure.
Okay, so this is, and much like what we did the last time when we were ordering the equipment for the other zones at Carpenter School, we ask that we bid this out separately. So we're saving the overhead. We're not paying the overhead on the equipment. And the sooner we can get the order in, the more we're guaranteed that we'll have all the units on time. So what we had done last time, which is what I'm asking again, is we're going out to bid for the units and that you would allow me to accept the lowest responsible bid not to exceed 120,000. And then just like last time, I would bring it back to the board, this time on April 8th for ratification of the award.
So I don't want to drag out the conversation. I have a question and a comment. The comment is I'm just utterly shocked that in a $2.5 million project, we're only spending $120,000 on equipment and the other $2.4 million is labor. So that's shocking to me.
Rates?
Yeah, seriously. So that's shocking to me. But so the question I have that's probably a Tony question here is, when it comes to the board voting on lowest responsible bidder, I know we've been through this a lot and discussed it on and off over the years with this board and the previous board that I was on. But basically what you're asking, Luann, and I don't mean this negatively, you're asking the board to waive its right to potentially challenge the lowest responsible bidder if you were to bring us one. So Tony, can you just explain for the board and the public, what the board is giving up here? And what I'm getting at is when we're given, when she goes out to bid and 10 bids come back and they're all deemed responsible and, there's a range of $1 million down to $120,000 and the board's then legally obligated to pick the $120,000 one because that was the quote lowest responsible bidder. The board still does have some wiggle room if the board believes that on its own, correct, that bid, they have reason to believe that bidder is not responsible, despite what the administration has told us that we could shoot it down and then either go back completely out to bid or potentially take the next in line, as I understand it.
Well, yes, the board could find, and you need some pretty objective evidence to show that they were irresponsible, which would then authorize the board to move to the next lowest bid. And that is often ripe for litigation when that kind of situation arises, which is why we often recommend, and that's the second option you provided, that if you don't like the winning bid, the lowest responsible, and maybe you don't think it's responsible, is that you throw out all bids and then you go out to bid again and try to get a better result. But again, with I think time is of the essence, is the issue that's why Luann is bringing this ratification process to you. But yes, if Luann does sign the contract, you're bound.
Right.
So then,
and so we're waiving our right. And again, I don't mean this in a pejorative way or anything. I'm just for public sake and for the board's sake, we're waiving our right to potentially challenge that, but there are very limited grounds, and it has to be pretty concrete evidence that somebody has that says, I don't think that I have reason to believe strongly that bidder is not responsible because my company used them and they stiffed us, or, whatever it is. And here's the evidence of it. I mean, right, Tony, there's limited facts in which that would work and that we wouldn't be subject to a lawsuit as a result of that.
yes, I agree. Yep.
Okay. So that's all I want for the board to hear.
So the other thing, Rick, is that the architect, they do vet out the bidders for us too.
Right. So there's a couple different heads in that whole conversation. Yes. So to the extent that anybody on the board is concerned about sort of handing that authority over, there are several, eyes on this before they select somebody. Several, yeah. Well, you've got 4, I've got 4, right? And so okay. So with that, why don't we take a motion on it, and then we can talk more if there's any other questions.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the awarding of the contract to the lowest responsible bidder for the mechanical units to be used in the classrooms, office areas of zones 1, 4, and 5, not to exceed $120,000.
Thanks, Fred. Is there a second?
Second.
Rebecca, was that you? Great, thank you. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion on this? And I guess just to state the obvious, the alternative would be, given the times of the essence, we'd have to call an emergency meeting. If Luann gets the bids back and we don't want to hand that authority over to her, then we would have to call an emergency meeting and do it ourselves. But if everyone's comfortable with that, then we can vote yes.
Or Rick, if the lowest responsible comes in over 120, we'll be talking.
Either way, right, because we're only giving you spend authority up to 120, right, exactly. But you don't, at this point, obviously, that you guys feel that number is pretty solid.
Yeah.
It's not going to come in over that. Yeah. All right. Any other discussion from the board? All right. And questions from the public, Natasha or Dr. Olson? Nope.
None.
Okey-doke. All right. We'll take a vote.
Photos,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Salas, yes. Biagi,
Yes.
Little,
Yes.
motion carries.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
And thanks, Lan, for that.
I also wanted to let you guys know that I did hear back from Ron. I texted him and he said that another district was using them. He goes, I just can't remember which one. So.
Great.
Solves a little mystery.
Did we have to put him on the clock for that text, or is he still off technically?
No, he can't work for.
Okay. Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
60 days, I think.
Yep. Yep. So we got a freebie out of him.
I was thinking the same thing, Rick. Yeah.
All right. So we're on to the next topic, A7, which is discussing effectively how we're going to pay for the bigger part of what we were just discussing a moment ago, the Carpenter HVAC project.
Okay, so let's kind of back up a little and walk into this slowly. Back a few months ago when we first started talking about the tax levy, I had Anjali Beige, who's an attorney for Chapman and Cutler, at the meeting with me to talk about abating our debt payment for this coming year. And then we also talked about what do we do with the remaining funds that are in the debt service levy, Fund 30. You know, how can we access those funds, or could we even access those funds? At that time, she had explained that we had a couple options. One was to have our auditor go back through the years and figure out what of that money was interest and what of that money was lost in cost. Okay, so the interest, you know, just the interest that's paid because the money's sitting in the bank. The lost in cost is the money on the tax levy. Remember, it used to be the 5%. So the county clerk puts the 5% on top of that tax levy because they really want to make sure you're making your bond payments. And so if your collections are falling short, the 5% is in hopes that that would cover any amount that your collection would be short, assuming you had no money in your debt service fund to fall back on. A few years ago, the board decided to, we have directed the county clerk, and the board had voted by resolution to not take that loss in cost because we had money in the bank to fall back on in the debt service fund. So we have not been collecting the 5%, I think 2 years or 3 years is what we've been doing. So here we are now. Our bonds are all paid off with the exception of the $350,000 payment, which will be made in June. And we are sitting on, it's a little higher than $2,075,000 in the debt service fund. And we cannot access this money unless we go through the exercise of going back to find what was lost in cost, what was interest. Because the only thing I could pull out of there is the interest. And the last more than 10 years, the interest we know has been so small. So we know of that 2 million, probably a lot of it's not interest in there. The lost in costs, the only way for us to get the lost in costs, so there's a couple things. One, you could leave the money here in the debt service fund. And then when the board issues bonds, you would, I don't want to get you guys too confused, but when you issue bonds, you could use this to help fund the issuing of those bonds. Okay, so that 2 million could be used. Or you could let it sit there, and when you issue bonds, you would have money in case your debt service levy ever came up short.
Gwen, can you just clarify for 1 second? Sorry.
Sure.
When you say issue bonds, you're not talking necessarily about the Carpenter project, but just some other project in the
Correct.
future, right?
So
okay.
If you were to issue bonds to build a new school or put additions on or something like that, you would have that money in there to fall back on if you didn't collect enough in your debt service levy. Now, what I would assume is that when new bonds would be issued, you'd go back to collecting the lost in costs, so you make sure, at least for a while, that your payments are being made. So where we are right now is we have the money in the debt service fund. All of the bonds are paid off. So this money is kind of like sitting in a savings account or something. And the only way for us to access this money is through, a convoluted process. But we have to issue a very short-term bond that has no interest associated with it. So it's just the process, because we have to still say to the taxpayers, which this is being published in the paper, hey, we're doing this. If you want to file, collect enough signatures to stop us from doing this, they have that ability to do that. And we have the forms available. If anybody wants them, we can send them the forms. And then they would need to collect a certain amount of signatures. And when they collected those signatures and it was verified, then that would stop us from issuing that bond. Now, that is something that school districts use, and sometimes not the school district, but the community, when you're issuing bonds, much larger amounts. I think there was one recently, not long ago, where they did collect enough signatures and they forced them to referendum. This money is money that we already have. This money is sitting in our bank account, literally. But the only way we can get it out of that bank account is to go through this process of having a hearing, allowing, if people want the 30 days, basically right, backdoor referendum, we all have heard that term before, for them to go collect signatures to stop us from issuing this bond. I don't see that happening because this is our money already. So it really is just the process now for us to get the money out of debt service and to get it into the capital projects fund so that we can pay for the work. I can't pay for any of the work out of the debt service fund.
So can you explain the mechanics of the bond itself? Because you just said a moment ago that the bond carries no interest. So me being a dummy investor here right now, who in their right mind is going to buy a bond for $2.5 million that pays no interest? What's the point?
So typically what happens is like they've asked our township treasurer to buy it. So sometimes that happens. Sometimes the district does it themselves. So they have ways. Raymond James may actually buy the bond or something, but we don't end up paying any interest on the bond. But we still have to go through, having our public hearing, having the petition period. It's, basically still all of the same steps. They'll mail the sheet out to potential bidders. It's all the same legal requirements as if we were issuing bonds where we were borrowing money.
And the firm who's going to issue this bond gets a commission or no?
They are paid, I think last time when we issued 10 million, I want to say it was about 100,000. And that money is actually paid for out of the proceeds that we receive. So that's not paid out of our operating fund. It's actually paid out of these proceeds before we receive them. So we have Chapman and Cutler, who's the attorney for the bonds. They're the bond attorneys. So the documents that you see tonight that you're looking at, the resolutions and all the other things, that's prepared by them. Elizabeth Hennessy kind of runs the show, and you guys have met Elizabeth Hennessy. She's been at board meetings. So she does the calendar. I have a whole schedule here in front of me for 4 months of everything that needs to be done. They handle, getting it in the paper. They handle, working with the bidders, and then the actual bond sale is done through her office.
Okay, so Luann, just to run the numbers again. So Chapman and Cutler is going to get $600 an hour or whatever to do its legal work on this. And then Elizabeth is going to get, let's just say if your number was 100 grand on a 10 million bond, we'll quarter that. She's going to get 25 grand on a $2.5 million bond.
Well, the 100,000 was for everybody. That was everything.
I don't understand.
So the 100 that we paid on 10 million was for everything. So that was bond counsel.
That was bond counsel. Okay.
It was everything.
All right. So roughly now we're going to be, but I'm just saying there is a cost to this. There's a $25,000 roughly. Let's just say if we, take those numbers and extrapolate to this $25,000 cost that we're going to pay out, even if there is no interest on it. So there is a cost to doing this if we issue this bond.
Correct.
Okay.
You're correct.
Okay. All right.
So do you want me to kind of continue talking, or do you want to?
Well, why don't we, let's see, I was going to say, because you briefed the board a little bit on this during the week, and I know some people had questions about it. So why don't we kind of pause? And I already interrupted you 17 times, as I tend to do, and asked you a bunch of questions, but why don't we see if anybody, I'll stop talking and see if anybody else has questions about it, as you've gone through right now, and then if not, we can keep moving on. So anybody else on what Luann's presented so far? Okie dokie. I guess not.
Okay.
All right. So I mean, to put it into simple terms, as I understand what you've said so far, we could either issue this no interest bond that is going to cost us something, some amount of money in not interest, but commissions and legal fees and other stuff to issue. And that is one way of getting our $2.5 million out of the debt service fund right now, because we cannot legally take it out of there and just write the check out of the fund to pay for the HVAC project at Carpenter. So the alternative to that is we leave the 2.5 in there, and the next big project that comes around after HVAC, where we're going to have to issue significant bonds for, let's say it's a building as a result of Dr. Olson's study on facilities, we're going to spend 10 million on a building somewhere. At that point, we issue the bonds, then that 2.5 million could be used to pay debt service on those, whatever, $10 million worth of bonds that he issues, or the board issues at that point.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. So that's just simple kind of where we are so far in your discussion on this.
That is correct.
Okay.
So as you know, this is to pay for the HVAC in zones 1, 4, and 5 at Carpenter School. The board had approved at the December meeting for us to begin the bid documents. So work has been happening on that. So tonight, we need approval of the intent to issue the working cash bonds, and then we need the board to call for a public hearing, which would be held at the next board meeting on February 11th. So we would be having a public hearing that night. And then the petition period for anybody to turn in, to stop us from doing this would be Wednesday, February 17th. So basically it starts now, they're publishing it in the paper on the 18th, and then people would have till February 17th. And then people see, our board meeting and we post everything, as we're supposed to. So if anybody wants to collect the signatures, they have about 30 days to do that.
Beyond what we're legally required to do with respect to publicizing in the paper, are we going to do anything else to publicize on our website or social media that we're having this hearing so people know what's happening?
Well, I can talk to Eric and see if he wants, when they do the Friday District 64 newsletter that goes out, we always say what was discussed at the board meeting. So it will be in there, and Pete always sends that to me ahead of time to review to make sure, it's correct in terms of the technical terms within it. So it will be in tomorrow's newsletter that goes out to the community.
And we also post upcoming agenda items for the meeting. So the hearing would be posted as well everywhere on the website and the e-news. So it's communicated.
Thank you.
So Luann, can I ask then the other question, I guess, which would be if the board opts to leave that money in the debt service fund to use for a future project and a future bond issuance for a future project, how would we pay for the Carpenter project? Can we pay for the Carpenter project?
Right. So we would have two options. One is to not do the work. You always have that option. And the second option is to take the money out of our operating funds. So next week, I am bringing a resolution where we called for a hearing next week. We'll have two hearings. And this is to move, my memory may not serve me right, I think it was 1.75 million out of the ed fund over to capital projects. So every year we have been taking money out of the funds, to try and not have such a high fund balance and get ourselves, closer to kind of what the board policy is. So that would be your other option.
So I guess in order for the board to maybe assess this, so the 175 you just mentioned, is that already earmarked for something specific, or is that you're just doing that in order to stay kind of in line with policy?
Paying off last summer's construction. Okay,
so that's earmarked for last summer. Okay,
yeah.
So after we pay that off, what are you looking at in terms of that fund balance? What's your thought on if the board wanted to pay, for instance, all of Carpenter out of that balance versus maybe part of Carpenter out of that balance? What does that look like?
I don't have that in front of me right now. I don't have the projections in front of me. I guess my only concern is just kind of given the times we're in right now, I'm not sure what's going to happen with, revenue in the near future. So that's my only concern. Now, when the board makes a decision on doing future construction, right? We always look first at how much money do we have sitting in reserve. So we're not accumulating this huge pile of money and then we're going and borrowing money.
Okay, so I'll just put you on the spot then. So what's your compelling argument for why to use up the money that's sitting in the debt service fund right now versus money that's sitting in the other operating fund? What's, when we all know on this call, or I should call it a call, but in this meeting, that there is going to be another project coming up. We don't know what it is sitting here tonight, but there's going to be another building project, and it's going to be multi-million-dollar within the next couple of years, certainly.
To me, this is the least riskiest. Next to not doing anything, to me, this is the least riskiest because you're not touching your operating funds right now.
Okay, and just to play devil's advocate though, if we went the other way and paid it out of, I'll call it the bank account, out of the operating account, and something big comes up 6 months from now, it's not like the money's not in the debt service fund, and it's not like we couldn't issue bonds at that point, right? We could issue bonds for a $5 million project. Let's say we had to, whatever, we had to do something at Franklin, $5 million. We could issue bonds at that point to pay for it and take the 2.5 out of debt service and pay for it. So from a risk standpoint, you're not losing that money. You're not subjecting it to some loss of any kind. It's just sitting there in a different account that we can't touch otherwise.
Right, but my concern with risk is always your day-to-day operations of your school district.
Yep.
Right, so if the state goes insane and pulls the EBF funding or something, that's almost $2 million a year. So we start looking at things like that, or collections fall off. I just feel like in these times, I'm trying to be very conservative.
So, okay, so just to play that out, I'm just trying to kind of walk through the argument then. If that were to happen, if suddenly we were to see $3 million in tax revenue for the district dry up so that you couldn't pay for operational things like teacher salaries or custodian salaries or whatever it is, then we couldn't issue bonds to make up that $3 million loss, right? You can only issue the bonds for capital projects, or could you issue bonds for that operational deficit?
I think for the debt service fund, it's only for capital projects, that you can't issue it to run your operating funds. Now, you do know, Rick, that you could, a district does, this one did back in 2007, right, issued bonds to increase their operain rate in the district.
But that was at a referendum, right? You're talking about the referendum or not, or non-referendum?
Yes.
Yes.
That was what they did. They increased their operating fund, to cover their expenses and kind of get the boat, back on an even keel and going in the right direction.
Yeah. So Tony, but that's correct then, that if we suddenly saw $5 million not show up from the state, and and we couldn't pay our teachers, for instance, we can't issue bonds to do that.
Correct.
Okay. So that's the difference here, is that the risk is that scenario plays out and we're sitting on not enough cash to meet our payroll, for instance, or something like that, because the state dried up.
Right. And your taxes,
weren't coming in, or the timing was off, or whatever it was, right? And you're not able to borrow money per se, at least borrow money in that manner.
Well, you can issue tax anticipation warrants, but that would be really expensive.
Right, I was going to say, you couldn't get it at this price level. You couldn't get cheap money like this. You would get expensive money at that point.
Oh, yes.
To pay for the operational stuff. So that's the risk.
Yes.
Okay.
And CPI did just come in, right, at 1.7. Is that, yeah? So for pretty low for moving forward.
Yeah.
God, I forgot we're at that time of year already.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, I've monopolized the conversation plenty now. So I don't know if we want to do a motion on this and then talk about it more, or if you've got more sort of 30,000-foot questions on it, philosophical questions that we want to address before getting into the weeds on it from the board. Otherwise, if everyone's ready, we can at least do the motion and then chat more if it gets seconded.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve resolution number 1261, declaring the intention to issue $2,015,000 working cash fund bonds for the purpose of increasing the district's working cash fund, and directing that notice of such intention be published in the manner provided by the law.
Thanks, Denise. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so we're in discussion right now. So anyone have thoughts? I mean, I guess the motion that's on the table right now is approve it as presented by the administration. So I think we've got, maybe if I heard it, well, there's probably 4 options, right? Approve it as presented, approve it in some sort of hybrid manner where it's less than the 2 point whatever million, something short of that, and the rest paid out of cash. Third option would be don't approve it at all, don't issue bonds at all, and pay just out of operation. And the fourth would be can the whole project, I guess, right? Those
Right.
would be our four options.
If the board decides that they want to do a hybrid, we would need to bring this back. So I wouldn't have you take action on this because you're changing the amount.
Right. Could
And-
we not amend the motion though and just modify the document, or it has to be noticed differently? There's got to be like for under IOMA or.
Well, we haven't had the hearing yet, so I guess, Tony, we would be able to change it because they wouldn't be putting it in the paper till Monday.
Yeah, I wouldn't be comfortable opining.
Yeah.
That'd have to come from Chapman and Cutler. It's
Yeah.
far out of my area. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's worth everybody at least putting, taking into consideration as they deliberate on this, that we might have to call an emergency meeting to just deal with that issue. If the board wanted to go halvesies on this or something, we might have to call a special meeting in a week or something to just do that motion.
Yeah, I would still have you take action, and then if we had to, we'd call
Yeah,
another.
sure. Yep. Okay, so I think those are the four options we've got. I can't think of a fifth, but if anybody's got a fifth, I'm all ears. So, but anyway, who wants to start out on their thoughts on this? Silence.
Well, I think last month, we really heard the need for this project. So I think the fourth option, canning the project, Rick, I think that one's out. So we're on to three. So I got rid of one for you.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's an option to not do four. And I think this board's already spoken unanimously that it doesn't want to do four. So I don't, unless someone really wants to revisit that whole issue, I think frankly, it'd have to be in the form of a motion to reconsider at this point. But I think the board's already spoken on option four. So I'm with you, Denise. All right, so then it's pay all out of operations, hybrid, or as presented, all bond. So sorry, Fred, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm a little uncomfortable about the perception of a backdoor referendum. I mean, I know that when I ran last time, this was an issue. I think it came up with respect to the secure vestibules. But I guess it's a little bit different in that we already have the money and there's not that expense to the taxpayer. And I just want to make that clear and get confirmation again from you, Luann, that that's.
Yeah, this is the, this is the only way we could do it, is we have to go through this entire process of, because the money was levied on a tax, so we have to go through this whole process.
So any other thought? I mean, we can take an up or down on it as presented. If if no one else feels strongly about options B or C, we can take an up or down on the motion as presented and see where that goes. I'll just share, I guess, my own personal thought is what I'm struggling with is that we're paying a bunch of lawyers, although I love lawyers, of course, but we're paying a bunch of lawyers to let us use our own money, and we're paying a commission to a bond salesman to let us use our own money, which seems, even if it's not a ton of dough, it seems a little preposterous that we have to pay somebody else to get our own money out of the bank. Seems kind of goofy. When we know fully that we're going to have a capital project coming up. I can't tell you what it is right now. Not that I'm hiding it, but I just don't know what the next one is, but it's going to happen and we're going to use this money and we're going to bond. There's no question that'll happen. So it just seems kind of odd that we would spend this money, spend all these fees per se, even if there's no interest, which I still don't get. But I mean, I understand, I hear you, Luann. It just seems shocking to me that there would be someone who would take the bond. Like there's got to be another ulterior motive as to why they're taking the bond. They're getting something out of it by taking the bond. They're somehow getting paid. I don't care if it's not interest. There's some money that's going to whoever is going to buy a $2.5 million bond for no interest. Otherwise they wouldn't do it.
Unless there's some tax
break or something. Yeah, who knows? I mean, obviously it would be obvious if the bond issuing company itself did it, because they're getting a commission either way. So they just look at it as it's an easy deal. They're going to get 20 grand or whatever for just giving us $2 million for a couple of weeks and then we take it right back. I don't know, but it just seems odd to me. So that's what I'm struggling with. And then I guess just the question of we've got the money in the bank and you know, why wouldn't we use this? I'm saying in operations, and I guess I don't see the risk as that significant on the potential for you know, loss in the tax revenue. I mean, at least when I was preaching about it back in March and doom and gloom and the sky is falling like I was, I didn't hear a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, our tax revenue is going to dry up and we better start tightening the belt at that time. So I don't understand then why all of a sudden we're saying we're going to tighten the belt now, or we're worried about the potential for that happening.
So, and Rick, I hear your concerns about the fees and, you know, the lawyer fees. I'm not a lawyer, so I can say that more easily. but the hybrid option, we'd still have those fees.
Absolutely.
I mean, so, you know, really maybe the only two options, I'm trying to get rid of options for you, are really the operating fund or what was presented before us.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, the hybrid made sense if there was interest to be paid, right? Then it would just be lessening the amount of interest, and that. But I agree with you totally. If we're going to pay fees, it seems stupid to go halvesies on. You might as well go all in or not at all. Because at least I would assume at least the lawyer fees are going to be the same regardless if it's 2 million or 20 million. The only difference in the fees would be the commissions on the bond based on the amount of it. So, yeah, I'm with you, Denise. All right. Well, if no one else is, you know, wants to necessarily either pose a different motion, if we want to just take an up or down on this, I say we do that unless anyone else has got other thoughts. Is there any, Dr. Olson or Natasha, anybody from the public have comment on this?
No.
Nothing has come in.
Okay. All right. If nothing else, and Luann, nothing else on your end?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, then let's take a vote.
Sanchez,
No.
Celis, yes. Little,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Biaggi,
No.
Sotos.
No.
Okay, let's see.
That was a
Sanchez
tie.
is no. Mhm.
That's a tie.
So tie is a no.
Correct.
Okay. So is that just done now, Tony, or is that a de facto pay it out of the operational, or do we now need to have a vote to authorize doing it out of the operation?
No.
And we can't do that tonight, right? Because we'd have to put that on a second.
No, you don't. You authorized us to go out to bid, and we'll bring the bid back for the work, and you'll approve it then.
And then that's how we'll pay it at that point.
Yeah. So I didn't move all the money I could this year, so we'll go ahead and move next week the money to, you know, that we already have authorized in our budget.
Okay.
So we'll move that, and then we'll probably just call for another hearing and move. I think I did 1.7. Do you remember?
Did 2, Luann, you did 2.
Okay, so 2, and we may have had authority up to 2,500. I'll have to go back and look at the budget. But if we do, we could go ahead and move it this year, so it's at least in there, so you're not running a negative fund balance, and then do the rest of it at the beginning of the next budget cycle.
Okay, but again, that 2 that you've moved is already earmarked for stuff from last year, last summer.
Most of it,
okay.
yes. And then to start paying your architect fees for Carpenter.
Okay. All right. So it's not an emergency tonight that this motion didn't pass. It's not an emergency in terms of what you have to do to keep moving forward on Carpenter.
Right. Correct.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, then let's move on to A8, which is the first reading of policies from press. So that's down as Dr. Olson, but I know the policy committee worked on that as well too. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Olson.
Sure. So I think real quick, I can just say that as the board has seen, Press 106 is not as meaty as the last couple of presses have been, where we've had to have a lot of discussion. A lot of the changes were in footnotes and those kinds of things. So that obviously this is just a first reading, and then we'll come back for a second reading at next week's meeting. And then Carol, do you want to talk more about the committee in general?
So I just had one brief point about these policies. And so this is our first reading. We're not voting tonight. One correction I had was on policy 6:315. The report says it's non-applicable, but it is. We don't currently have a 6:315, but we are adding it. That's the one about high school credit for students in grade 7 or 8. Dr. Olson, did you want to talk a little bit about that? I mean, I know you discussed that at our meeting.
Yeah, so once you get into the language of that one, it's pretty much on if this is available. And so this has been a conversation that we're currently having with 207 and its feeder schools. So there could be, ramifications of this going forward, but there are not currently.
And we will correct that table for the vote next meeting.
Sure, thanks.
So Carol and Rebecca, was there anything in your meeting? I know you're going to give us an update on the meeting itself, but was there anything in your meeting with respect to Press 106 that you wanted to discuss with the board tonight that wasn't kind of self-explanatory in the memo?
No, this was very uncontroversial, this batch.
Okay. All right, anything from the board? Any questions for the policy committee or for Dr. Olson on this before we move to the 8.5, the update? All right, Carol and Rebecca, you were going to give us an update. Then we added, this is the addition to the agenda tonight in between A8 and A9 on an update from policy.
Right, so the policy committee meeting met by Zoom on January 8th, and we did discuss Press 106. After that, we discussed 2:140, which a board member put on our agenda, I believe at the last committee meeting or our last board meeting. 2:140 was the communications to and from the board policy. Right now, we didn't have substantive changes. I think we're at a weird timing. Right now we're going to have a few new board members. And so we weren't sure if we should substantively get into this policy right now. We did invite comments from, all the current board members and of course the public, but we didn't receive any. So, I mean, just still, if you have thoughts about 2:140 communications to and from the board, just send that to us at any time and we'll discuss it at the next policy committee meeting. And then we also have 4:60 purchases and contracts. I believe that was Tom and Larry, or maybe both Tom and Larry, who brought that up when we were buying the iPads and Chromebooks. They were talking about going out to bid for more or almost all projects. So right now there are certain exceptions for when we don't have to go out to bid, as we saw earlier today with the custodial contract. So right now there's a $25,000 threshold. One simple change could be to lower that dollar amount, which, just let us know if that's something that the board is thinking about. And there are also other various options. So we did look at other districts and they did mostly follow the press policy, which is what we have. I think someone, maybe Dr. Olson, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it was Luann, looked at other cities, right? And whether they go out to bid, or maybe it was MJ. I don't know. We talked about this over 2 policy committee meetings.
So Carol, can I just ask this? This wasn't about single source, right? This was about like specialized contracts, like IT contracts and stuff.
It's everything. The whole policy 4:60 purchases and contracts, and that whole, right. There's also administrative procedures about what they have to do that. So that I think would be helpful for the board members who did have concerns, so they could see that people aren't, randomly just, awarding contracts to their friends, and that there are some procedures involved. But yeah, we could always change it. And like I said, the easiest thing to do would be to lower that $25,000 threshold. So 2 other policies that I added for the discussion at our last meeting were 2:160, the policy about the attorneys, and 2:170, our architects, engineers, and surveyors, only because these are related to the purchases and contracts policy. And I think early on, maybe it was almost 2 years ago, there were murmurs about, maybe, choosing a new law firm or architects. Sorry, Tony, nothing personal about, your firm or anything like that, but just that we've been with, these firms for so long that, maybe you do want to do an RFP for, these professionals. So I think 4:60, 2:160, and 2:170, those are three policies that we'll still, continue to discuss and work on. And we don't want to, throw a wrench into, various contract negotiations or other big projects that, Hodges and Louise would be working on for us. So we would do it in a way that wouldn't be disruptive. So that's another thing. And that's also another issue for, our board, which will be changing pretty soon. And then we get to 4:180, which is our next item on the agenda. So I'm done with 8.5 unless anyone else had questions.
Yeah, I just had a quick question then back to sort of my question about single source. So I think I was the one who requested the single source issue. And what I was hoping to see was the city of Park Ridge had done a pretty exhaustive analysis on this and polled a bunch of other municipalities and school districts around the country that had basically, for lack of a better word, additional hoops for the administration to check off when they were deciding on single source. So if they wanted to, if it was if Jason comes to us and says, we've got to buy 10 more pieces of equipment and I want to buy this brand of equipment, that Jason's got to put a compelling argument to the board why that brand of equipment is the one and that brand can only be bought through, Joe's, dealer in Peoria, Illinois, because that's the only source of it in the state of Illinois that we can buy it from. Then he's got to present a compelling argument. Again, partially it's to get around to make sure that that's not Jason's buddy down at, no offense, Jason, that it's not Jason's buddy down at Peoria that is the one selling that stuff, but that there's a reason that they've selected that particular product, vendor, whatever, company, manufacturer, because it is a single source and can't go out to bid at that point. So the city of Park Ridge adopted that a couple of years ago, and I had presented that, I think, to policy to ask them to look at that specifically, to see if some of those additional hoops that they put into place is something that we could adopt as well too.
Right, we'll continue to look at that. And also, I'm pretty sure Larry wanted us to look at everything too, not just that. I think he had an issue with the whole procedure for purchasing everything.
Yep. And I guess I would say, I hear you that there's a new board that's going to get seated in May, but for the time being, I'm still elected here and I've got 4 more months on my term, and I'd like to see that done before I leave. We're elected for 4 years, not 3.5. So I'd like to make sure that we keep pushing the ball forward while we're still here.
Rick, I'm not familiar. Is that report on what the city did, is that available publicly?
I have a copy of it myself, but I'm pretty sure, it's part of it's been, whatever you want to call it, codified, for lack of a better word, at the city level. I'll find a link to it on the city website and I'll send it to the board. I've got a hard copy, I shouldn't say a hard copy, but I think a PDF of it as well too, that I'll see if I can dust off and send everybody.
Yeah, because I think if the policy committee can see the data and that there were municipalities and school districts involved in constructing that would probably be helpful.
Yep. Okay. I will.
And then the other question I had too, this is for Tony and Dr. Olson. We do have those administrative procedures that are right now internal for, what the district does to do, to select these various companies. So would that be something that we could just, post or disseminate, or, I didn't know if they're under wraps for a reason, but that would be helpful information. I think, Rick, Rick, you should already be able to see that, and so should Larry, just so you can see what the district does already.
Yeah, so administrative procedures are not something that is shared with the public. Those are just internal operating documents, that we use, and we can, do different things with them as we choose, and as press comes out with new information of deciding how those procedures best work for District 64 and whether we would do it at the time. Tony, I don't know if you need to reference a specific guideline in regard to that, but I'm not aware of sharing administrative procedures with the public.
There's some districts that have them on their website, but not all. It's very spotty. Some randomly do, some don't.
Right. Some link it to the policy that it's applicable to, others don't post it. At the end of the day, if someone wanted to see it, it is a public document, so they could FOIA it. But that's really up to each district and what they choose to do.
Okay, thanks. And I did want to go back to maybe just clarify something that Carol had mentioned, that I think when she was saying about a new board coming in, she was specifically referencing the policy about communication to and from board members. And, you know, if the board remembers, this particular policy has been very difficult for us to discuss. And there's a lot of different opinions on this, and we tend to spend a lot of time talking through those pieces. And I think the policy committee was wondering, does it make sense for us to work as a board for the next 3 months to hammer this all out when the next board might come in and do something different? But I think in regard to those other board policies, we want to continue to work with the current board while you're still here.
Right, and so for 4:60, two policy committee meetings ago, MJ and Luann did do, you know, a presentation at that one. So the discussions are ongoing. We're not sweeping that under the rug.
Okay. Any other discussion then on either the 106, press 106, or on the update from policy before we move on to the next agenda item? All right. Well, thanks, Carol and Rebecca, for the work again this month on policy. All right. So this issue was discussed. I mean, it's been discussed, frankly, at the last, I don't know how many meetings. But, you know, one of the things that we came to in the last meeting is that while the board has spoken, at least for the time being, on the issue of whether to require a vote on any of the COVID plans, and I guess specifically what we're talking about is the remote versus hybrid or all in person or whatever learning scenarios that Dr. Olson and his team have adopted. Whether we want to if we want to revisit that vote and how procedurally we can revisit that vote. And Tony, I'll try and get this right, and you can yell if I get this wrong here, but since the board's spoken on it, the only way to re-vote on that is in the form of a motion to reconsider. And that motion to reconsider would have to be made by someone who was in the majority of the to not vote. So I know there's a lot of double negatives in this thing, but the board voted a couple months ago 4-3 not to vote on this issue and to interpret some language in the policy so as not to require a vote on this. So in order for us to formally re-vote on that, it would have to be in the form of a motion to reconsider. But and again, it would have to be by one of those 4 people who voted yes, not to vote. But tonight we can always have the discussion again, not necessarily with a vote. And if we want to have a vote, if we conclude at the end of this discussion right now that there is at least one person from that 4 that wants to make a motion to reconsider, they can't make it tonight, but they could make it at the next meeting. Is that how it would work? Because it's not been noticed, or I'm not sure.
Yeah, because right now the item is on the agenda as discussion only.
Okay.
So it'd have to be noticed up appropriately 48 hours in advance of the meeting.
Okay. So I guess what we'll aim for in this discussion that we're going to have right now is if it is clear that at least one person of that 4 intends to make a motion to reconsider, then we'll add that to the agenda for the next meeting, and it'll be a formal motion for a new vote on the issue. And if there's not, then we're having a discussion and we move on.
You also should note that one of the 4 is not present tonight.
Correct. Correct. And I'm not going to purport to speak for him. So, I mean, I won't even say what I was going to say. So I'm not going to speak for Larry. So that does, you know, I guess that means 3 of us have to, one of the 3 of us has to change tonight in order for it to happen. So, I guess I'll just tee it up at that. And if anyone, you know, Tom, I know this is your issue. I don't want to put you on the spot, and I'm not intending to, you know, put you in the hot seat on this, but I know you feel passionately about this issue. But if there's anyone else that does too, that wants to, you know, sort of tee this off for us and you know, raise the issue again and present the argument as to changing the policy, then I'd say let's have that conversation.
That conversation is not happening tonight, though, right?
Well, we can have a conversation. We can't have a vote tonight, but we can have a conversation as to whether we want to go down that road.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with having that conversation tonight or our next meeting if everyone wants to have some time to think about it. I think everyone knows where I stand on this.
Okay. Well, I mean, if we're going to have it again at the next meeting, I'm fine with that. But again, it would have to be a discussion item again at the next meeting, unless one of the three people who voted yes the last time wants to effectively change their vote tonight and make it in the form of a motion to reconsider at the next one. So again, just to point out who that is, that's me, Denise, Fred, and Larry were the four yeses. Again, yes, not to vote. And the three no's not to vote were Carol, Rebecca, and Tom.
Right. Just to summarize, today it would be good if we were to find out if Fred, Denise, or Rick, if you were changing your mind, and if you wanted us to vote to approve the reopening plan, just so that we could tee it up for the next meeting.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think that's all we really can do tonight. So I'm not, I mean, I guess if any of you who are on the no vote side, want to make, an argument to try and persuade one of us, or again, if Fred, Denise, or Fred or Denise, if either of you feel differently than you did the other night right now and want to state that and say, yeah, I would do a motion to reconsider the next, and we can bypass the whole conversation and just put it on the next agenda.
I mean, all I'd like to just reiterate is I feel that it is our obligation to be more involved in an issue of this magnitude. And I would hope that, I would get more support from the board on that issue. I mean, there's to rehash the whole reasonings for it and do it all over again without knowing if either of the ones who voted yes to no are even willing to consider changing their votes. I think it would be best to just hear that first before we go down that rabbit hole.
This is Denise. I am not changing.
And I'm not changing either.
So I'm not changing my position on whether we formally vote on it. I guess what I would entertain in my own mind, and I think we're already kind of there, it's just not formal. I think we're all in agreement on what I'm about to say, but tell me if I'm wrong here. But I think we're all of the mindset that at bare minimum, the board should be briefed on all of the major decisions, and the board should have an opportunity formally to voice their opinions, concerns, comments, whatever it is, on those proposals from Dr. Olson. And whether that's in the form of actually sitting down at one of these in a meeting, or whether it's by memo and and written response to Dr. Olson, I think we're all on the same page that we at minimum want that. And I would be fine even with formally again, this is just me speaking, putting that into writing, that, there's got to be a formal opportunity for the board to voice concern, criticism, comment on any of those major decisions related to that. And they have to be given ample time. And I guess the only thing I would say is the devil's in the details on how you'd put that into writing, because it's something I've struggled with this issue the whole time. Is I don't want Dr. Olson in a position where every little decision that makes up the big gigantic decision has to be run past the board. And an example is the lanyard thing. And again, I don't want to put you on the spot, Dr. Olson, but again, I'll say it, and this isn't a criticism of you, it's just this shows the difficulty in the issue. The first time I found out about the lanyard issue is when your memo went to the public. I was the board president and I didn't know about it. And I'm not saying that's negative. I'm just saying your interpretation of the lanyard issue was it wasn't a particularly controversial issue. It was, it was part of the mechanics of bringing everybody back into the school. And so that wasn't something you needed necessarily to run past the board and get our, take our temperature on, no pun intended, with that particular issue. So you didn't. And it just came as part of the mechanics of here's how we're getting everybody back to school when you sent it out to the parents. And I'm fine with that, but that, to me, that shows the difficulty in the issue. That's an example of it. That is that one that he should have brought to the board's attention and gotten our temperature on before sending it out. I don't know. So anyway, Tom, you were
so
gonna say
Rick, yeah.
Yep.
So having you said that, and having a couple of board members not emphatically not change their mind, I would be happy with a hybrid version of what I was asking for. And I would be okay with the ability to, have these discussions. I just think it's best that we have them at an actual open meeting, as opposed to just getting memos, because it seems that we've had the opportunity to try the memo thing, and it just, many things get, and not intentionally. I don't think any of this is done, to prevent any of us from knowing what we're doing. But like you said, it's difficult to decipher and determine what requires our attention or what doesn't. So I think we should, if we need to have more meetings, that's fine with me. But I would let, during this process of COVID, at the very minimum, I think we should at least have these discussions and be given the opportunity to discuss them openly and give our opinions and our feelings on them. And I would hope that the rest of the board would be okay with that, at least, since they're not willing to change their mind on the other issue.
Yeah, so just if I could jump in on a couple things.
Yeah.
One is, I understand the point that you were making, Rick. I'm pretty confident about it, but I would like to look back. I think I did inform the board about the lanyards, but it was back in December. So it, but there is the possibility that I didn't, and I'll look back, and if I didn't, then I should have. Secondly, what I just want to add to this conversation is, so let's say, for instance, the decision when we got back to school of whether we were going to start early or not. So, on that Monday, we're looking at all the data. Where are we at right now, and what can we do? So then for the next 2 days, that's, Joel meeting with the various union leaders and talking to them about it. Leanne needed to meet with certain teacher groups to get their input on it. And so then when I'm telling the board Tuesday night, I think I even said to you, I'm pretty sure that this is what's going to happen, because then Wednesday morning, the administration team looked at it one more time before we then sent that communication out. So I think it would just be finding that time to call the meeting to be able to then give you all the information so that you could vote one way or the other, so that I know whether to inform the community that we're starting early or we're not. So, I just think that I want to think through the logistics of the pieces too, which does make it challenging.
Right. And just to clarify, Dr. Olson, I don't think, at least even what I propose, and I think what I heard Tom say as kind of the middle ground is, it would be an informational meeting with an opportunity to talk, but it wouldn't be a vote. It wouldn't be a ratification by the board. It would simply be, you're basically taking the temperature of the board on, sort of the major points. But I agree with you. That's a very good illustration of, how are you going to pull that off with all the other moving parts in there, and then get the board involved in it as well too. To me, the only way I see something like that working out is, you gave us a heads up a week in advance. This is where I think it's going, and the scenarios A, B, and C may play out depending on how the union responds, how the numbers come back, and how whatever the color of the sky is that morning. And so I just want to make sure the board's okay with, I'm going to make this decision if A, B, or C happens on that, and then we kind of go from there. But I don't see how it's practical to convene the board every single time you're pivoting on something which is happening literally 3, 4, 5 times a week at minimum on stuff. So I think that, like I said, the devil's in the details if we were going to do something like that. But I would not personally, I'm just speaking for myself, would not be averse to putting that into the policy and just saying that, that we would make every effort to call special meetings, to have the board convene more frequently, to be involved in the discussions and the conversations related to these big plans. And,
And Rick, I support that, because I fully understand that there are certain issues that convening us would actually delay the decision that's trying to be made. And some of these decisions are so important, the timing of them are so important that, but at the very minimum, I would, like the heads up that this is the decision that was made, so that, any board member can then reach out to other board members or do whatever they feel they need to do to try to either slow it down because they feel very adamantly about it, but at least be, informed beforehand, but at the same time, making every possible effort to convene the board on decisions where it's actually possible.
Yep. I agree, Tom. So Tony, I'm just curious, of the districts that you do work for that are in the same boat as us where they're not voting, they're not ratifying formally the, the decisions of the administration. Are other districts doing this, what we're talking about convening the board more frequently to have these open conversations about some of the decisions being made?
I don't believe they're setting that forth in policy, but you certainly can. But yes, during this time of COVID, there are boards that are meeting routinely on this issue, obviously.
Okay, so that's sort of where I was going to go next, which is, Tom, I'm kind of thinking that, I mean, I guess I would be willing to maybe say that I would rethink my vote on it, but not for purposes of voting on these plans, but simply to say I would reconsider the policy. I would reconsider the wording in the policy that would, basically not, while it wouldn't mandate the board to do it, it would strongly suggest that the board convene as frequently as possible to have these open conversations with the superintendent about the plans as they're changing. But I also kind of think like, I can make this commitment to the 6 of you board members, well, 5 and Larry, that I will personally convene the board. If we're all on board on that, or at least there's a majority of us, I'll convene the board as much as possible as, for special meetings to talk about these. If Dr. Olson can kind of give me a heads up as to when he thinks there are going to be big decision points that he's making, and he can give us enough time in advance to convene the board, we'll do it. I'm fine with that. If everybody else is fine with doing that, I'm completely fine with that. And I think just working out the details of that is, I don't know that we have to put it into a policy. If you have my word on it, that at least for the next 4 months, I'll do that. If everybody's good with that.
I was one of the people who voted in the minority, which is the 3 of us who, I think we were mostly in favor of the press policy drafted by IASB, which did say that the board should vote on the plan, but that the superintendent did have discretion to, amend it and make certain changes so that the board would not necessarily have to call an emergency meeting every time. And if we're talking about meeting all these times just for information, then why don't we just change the policy so that the board votes? And so built into the mechanism for having the board vote on the plan, then if that were to happen, then the superintendent would already feel compelled to have to fill us in just because he would want us to vote in favor of the plan. So that's, what would happen. But I mean, we've talked about it a lot. I mean, we are beating a dead horse. It looks like nobody on the majority side as of now is going to change their minds. So that's where we are.
And maybe I'll also throw in that what I think is different from earlier in the year is that from March through the fall, it was just coming at us so fast and so many decisions had to be made regularly. I have felt that now that the January decision is made and we're moving back into in-person, things will still move fast, but they won't move as fast. And then I think we can have greater opportunities maybe for meetings or more discussions too, regardless of how the board, goes forward.
Well, unless in the last 7 minutes of discussion, Denise or Larry or Fred have had a change of heart, I'm hoping, praying, maybe. I would still like to have Rick, some of what Rick mentioned, some formalizing, putting it into the actual policy, even if it's just drafted very loosely, just so that we don't continually have this conversation as to where we stand on, on being informed. I just want everyone to know that I still feel it's very, very important that this board and the new board and every future board, when it comes to issues this large and this important, should be a lot more involved than we actually have been. Not saying, and that is not a knock on how I feel our superintendent has handled it. In fact, I have supported the majority of the decisions made by the superintendent. I just feel that it was my obligation to be more involved in it and have an opportunity to speak on how I feel prior to the decisions being made. And I hope the rest of the board members can maybe find a way to hybrid it if they're not willing to change their mind.
So Denise and Fred, are you I'm not asking you to change your vote right now. I'm asking, or at least with respect to the vote part of it, but are you amenable to the idea, sort of the middle ground idea that I posed of one, either changing the policy or just giving me sort of that trust and discretion for at least the rest of the way out for the next 4 months, that I will convene the board as much as possible whenever Dr. Olson cues me into large decisions being made that will be involved, even in special meetings and emergency meetings if need be, to do that? Or do you want to codify that in a policy? Do you want to leave it a little more loose? What's your thoughts? Or do you not like it at all?
Maybe we can say that the superintendent must loop you in. At least one of us will be looped in, and then you can either loop the rest of us in or decide if you feel that you need to call a meeting. I'm not just spitballing, but yep. I know you said you're not asking. I am asking for Denise, Larry, or Fred, or all to change their mind.
Okay, understood. And I will say for the record, I mean, Dr. Olson, if there was a big decision, he does tell me he would bring me in, but those big decisions, I think when that comes up, the next question or the next statement out of his mouth is, when should I tell the board? When should I alert the board to this? Do we put it on the agenda? Do we, do I send it out in a memo? And I think every time that, at least Dr. Olson, you've alerted me to sort of a pivot point for you, the board has been brought into that conversation as well. Now, again, not publicly, Tom, you're absolutely right, not in the form of a formal meeting, but certainly behind the scenes, the board's been made aware of them, either in the form of a Friday memo or a special memo that comes out from Dr. Olson. But I hear you that what we're talking about is making it one, more formal, and two, more public, more transparent, that if there's those big discussions, that we're going to do it in a meeting like this as opposed to behind closed doors. So Denise, Fred, any thoughts on that?
I am amenable to that hybrid kind of thing you talked about, Rick, where either one, either you call us into additional meetings and we discuss and hear what Dr. Olson has to say, or we could codify it. I mean, I'm open to that.
Oh, I was going to say, do you have a preference? Do you like putting it into policy? I think Tom's preference is policy. And again, I'm going to get to Carol and Rebecca, who are on the no side of the vote, before I want to hear what they have to say. But do you see it as being more of a change the policy to put that in there, or to leave it loose at the discretion of the president, this current one or the future?
I don't know if I have a strong preference either way at the moment. I could be persuaded either way, I think.
Denise?
Although Tom has been persuasive tonight, his prayers were not answered. I'm keeping where I am, but I think the policy can stay loose with your discretion. I really have liked, I think, the past 3 meetings, and maybe it happened at the meeting where we added the COVID update. And I think if we keep doing that, it's a standing agenda item. And so at our monthly meetings, we're definitely talking about that. If there's a need for the board to convene in between there, but we know every month there is that standing, we're going to talk about it at the public meeting. That I think has really been helpful, Rick.
Yeah, I agree, Denise. And that's not going away, at least for the next 4 months. That's not going away. That's going to be on every agenda. And I like the way we've done it, where Dr. Olson's presented and then the board's had an opportunity to ask questions, say what they want to say. We open it up to the public. I think that's great. And I think just to where Tom's going is that in between those meetings, if something big is changing, and I think a good example is over the, late December break and everything, there were some decisions being made, by administration, and the board wasn't convened, and we were all out on, on holiday breaks and everything. And we could have convened, I guess, for some of those decision points. And that's, I think, where Tom is saying he'd like more involvement, formal public involvement by the board, which I'm fine convening the board if we all are, if we're good with that.
And I'm fine. Go ahead, Tom.
Rick, if COVID is still as large of an issue come after the April elections, I'd like for us to, if we're going to agree to leave it up to the president, I'd like for us to revisit this once a new president is seated, because dependent on who that president is, we don't know how we're going to feel about wanting only that president to be the one that's being informed. I may feel comfortable with it being you, but I may not feel comfortable with it being myself if I run for president.
So I don't want it to be something that goes past the current seated president.
Yep. Okay. So Carol and Rebecca, I know you are on the no side of the vote with Tom. So how do you feel about the hybrid idea? I'm guessing, I guess first the question is, did either of you change? Not that it really matters, I guess, because that wouldn't form a motion to reconsider, but I'm assuming you're both in the same page as where you were before. And what do you feel about the hybrid concept we talked about tonight?
So yes, I'm on the same page as I was before. I'm in favor of the IASB version. The hybrid version, I don't know if that really addresses any issues or solves any problems. And the other thing that was mentioned is, making decisions based on who the person is. I think we should, consider the policies and what we're doing, not based on who the individual is who's there. Because with this policy, I think it should be this way, whether we have Dr. Olson or another person, and whether Rick's president or any other person's president. I think that's what we should have in mind, not whether it's, person specific, because as we know, something can happen to each of us at any time, and we won't be here forever. So that's my only point. I did have a procedural question though for Tony. So right now you're saying that one of the people in the majority, the 4 who voted in favor of this policy, would have to make a motion to reconsider. So what does happen? What happens after we don't have all of the 4 people on our board anymore? Then procedurally, are we just starting from scratch and we're just saying, oh, it's just a regular amendment to the policy? So what would we have to do procedurally once we don't have, some of these people aren't going to be on the board in, June, let's say we're discussing it.
I'd have to check Robert's Rules of Order, but I think my assumption is that you're right. If it's new people, they could revisit the policy.
Isn't it kind of like convening a new Congress, kind of thing? Like the old Congress goes away, new Congress starts, and all the bills have to be pulled and reissued and, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's what I believe it would be, yeah. I'd have to double check the rules, but it's coming from Robert's Rules of Order. Is what you guys by board policy have agreed to run your meetings pursuant to.
And that would make sense, Carol, because then that if it weren't that way, that would mean we could never, a board 10 years from now could never revisit a policy that was enacted 10 years previously, unless they resurrected somebody from the old board to, do a motion to reconsider kind of thing. So I think logically it must mean that when the new board gets seated, the slate gets reset at that point. I think
right. And
Robert's
we've had
rules.
discussions before about the board also being able to suspend its own policies. So we realize that they're not set in stone either.
Right. Exactly. So, okay. All right. So, so I'm hearing you that, obviously, again, you're still of the mindset that we should vote. But it sounds like you're also in support of, if we're going to at least do this hybrid thing, that it be, for lack of a better word, codified in policy and not just left loose. Is that a, yeah?
I mean, it could be left loose. I think right now our policy is still ambiguous.
Okay. Rebecca, any feelings on that?
I would also prefer it be codified. I mean, we're the policy committee, so I guess that's, more up our alley, but I just would prefer it be in writing. I do like the monthly updates. I think those are good. And I did look it up. The lanyard was in the December 11th memo.
This lanyard or the special needs instructional student lanyard? Because the only time I remember, again, and maybe I'm totally wrong about this, the time that I remember discussing it as a board was when we were talking about nonverbal special needs kids who we needed a lanyard for because we had no other method of being able to, when they were in the building, assess that.
This says
it was in the memo for all students. It was in the memo on December 11th, sorry.
Okay, well then I stand corrected. I apparently forgot that.
I think it was stickers for the special ed students, right?
At the beginning of the year, yes.
Was that what it was, Dr. Frost? Yeah, okay. I remember that conversation, and that was the first time I had heard lanyards or stickers or whatever it was that we were going to consider doing.
There's a lot happening. I think it's okay not to remember on December 11th this thing was said.
Yeah.
But yeah, I prefer the codified. I do like the monthly updates, and I do like the idea of convening if something major is going to change, and look forward to a time when things aren't majorly changing.
Yeah. Don't we all?
Yeah.
Don't we all? All right, so are you guys, when's policy meeting again?
I don't believe we have a current date.
Okay,
We do not. It's usually triggered by a press issue that would come out. So we just met for Press 106, and I don't know that Press 107 is in the works yet, but usually about a month or two. It depends on how often they come out.
okay,
We
well,
can
it sounds
always
like,
convene. We can always convene for, other reasons.
well, I was gonna say, it sounds like you may be convening for this single source issues to try and get this wrapped up by May. So if that's the case, I mean, maybe we could meet, you guys could meet sooner rather than later on this issue and put some ideas down on what that might look like in terms of codifying it, codifying the convening of the board for, major issues on this thing and what that language would look like. And then in the meantime, the board, I give you my commitment that I will continue to talk with Dr. Olson on a regular basis. And if we believe that there's something there that's of any magnitude where we want, we need to convene the board to talk about that, we'll do that. And I'll be truthful that I don't think, I think that's different than what we've done in the past, because I think there have been a lot of decisions that the administration's made without convening the board. They've kept the board in the loop, but not convened the board. So that it would be a little bit of a departure, not a bad one, just a departure from what we've done, that we would convene ourselves more regularly to talk about some of these issues publicly.
And just so I understand, we would be workshopping then language to stick into the press policy, or we would be doing something from scratch?
Well, I think it would be into our current policy.
Okay.
Because we didn't adopt the press policy, we adopted something different. So it would be something, massaging the current policy to include some type of language that would require the board to convene more regularly in these situations. So, all right. Everybody good then with that conversation? All right, so in the meantime, Dr. Olson and I will work offline with that and kind of talk through logistics and how that would practically play out. And then, I'll certainly report back to the board, maybe in the form of a memo and in a week or so, both of us will, on how we're going to see that playing out. And then we'll endeavor to call those meetings more regularly.
So procedurally, are you adding a motion to the next meeting agenda because we're basically undoing the policy that everybody voted on previously? So do we need that?
I don't, because I'm not hearing that we're undoing the policy. I'm hearing that policy committee is going to bring a modified version of the current policy back that's unrelated to the vote, no vote. It's total, it's a completely new issue basically. So it's not a motion to reconsider on the vote, no vote. We're adding something totally different, just as if we were.
Right, but we're reconsidering the policy that was just approved though, right? So isn't it the same in substance that you're changing the policy for whatever reason, right, or no?
I don't know, Tony. Is that, I guess that's, kind of.
Yeah, we're not voting on the same issue, but as of right now, what I'm hearing is there's consensus among the board members here today to revise the policy in line with this middle option, and nobody's objecting to that. So why don't we get a draft of that and bring it to the board? I can check the Robert's Rules of Orders procedurally between now and then, but again, like Carol said, if you guys are all on the same page with this option, you can set aside or suspend policies at any time and move forward. So I don't want to get caught up in a lot of technicalities. If you've got an agreement on how you want to proceed, we should proceed with that and get some language for the board to consider.
Okay. All right, we have a game plan. I know we have a lot more to do tonight, so even though it doesn't look like it on the agenda, so I want to keep us moving here. All right, so we've got the next issue, which is the substitute teacher pay increase. I know the board's been briefed on this. This is an issue that just popped up in the last couple of days, but the board's been briefed on it a little bit, and Dr. Martin's going to give us a little more background on this and where we are for the public, and then there's going to be an action item for us on this.
Yeah, so I appreciate everybody allowing us to bring this tonight. So let me give you a little background and explain the whole thing. So tonight here, we're asking the board to consider a $25 increase for substitutes who work in person only during the pandemic or COVID time. So let me give you a history of where we're at to start the year and how we've gotten to the point where we're at. So at the start of each year, we do with our neighboring districts a substitute teacher survey where we all participate in a Google Doc and we look to see where we're at and what everybody's doing. And typically, normally we all want to be in about the same spot because we compete for the same pool of people. And quite honestly, it's an easier thing if we're all kind of on a level playing field. And historically, we have all pretty much been in the same rate. So with our surrounding districts, just for an example, all of the Skokie districts, 68, 69, 73.5, charge their subs, or I'm sorry, pay their subs $120 a day. Norridge pays $120 a day. River Trails pays $110 a day, but they go up to $120 after 30 days. Mount Prospect has $110 and $120 rate. It just happens to depend a little bit on when somebody was hired. Arlington Heights pays $112 a day. Deerfield is at $120. Wilmette is on $115. So you can see, and Park Ridge pays $120. Our two biggest competitors, so to speak, for substitutes are Des Plaines and the main school district, 63 and 62. And what you find historically, or what you'll find, is that substitutes really work geographically close to an area of where they live. As we talked about with the sub companies, typically subs don't move, over great distances. And part of that is because, as I said, the pays are similar, but every town has multiple schools, and usually every school district needs subs. So what you'll find is there really isn't a big difference for somebody to go 4, 5, 6 towns over. We all seem to be about in the same boat. So for us, again, our two biggest competitors are our neighbors, as you would expect. And up until just recently, we were all in the same pool, paying roughly the same amount. We're 120, Des Plaines was 120, and Maine 63 was 127. This past week, something substantial changed with our neighbor that has caused us to kind of relook at this very quickly. Over in 63, they are in some really dire needs, even a greater distress for subs than we have been. And so they have gone and changed their substitute rate from $127 a day to $200 a day. Just to give you an idea, a lot of districts' long-term sub rates, that's where you're paying somebody to be in a position for 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 8, 12 weeks, will pay somewhere in the neighborhood of about $230 to $265. So their starting rate, just to, hey, come in, I need a PE teacher today, they moved up $80 roughly, or a little bit less, about 75. Also, what we've seen is our neighbor Des Plaines has gone to offering $25 as a kind of like this thank you during the COVID time, so that they still kept the base of 120, but for people who come in, they're doing a $25 a day extra. And since we compete directly with these two people, I think it's important that we stay competitive and we don't look to lose people to our neighbors. I'm not advocating for a $200 a day substitute increase. And somebody might say, why? My thing is, I don't think it's sustainable over the long run. I think you need to look at a rate that is something that is sustainable. If you want to make a change or you're going to do something, I think there is something I really like, having spoke with my counterpart over in 62. What they're doing is kind of like this little bit of a thank you or a bonus type, so to speak, for people who come in during the pandemic. And then we're going to fall back to our normal rates. Now, that doesn't mean somewhere along the line through the natural progression of things that, the rates may not go up over time, but you're doing it kind of with the natural flow of things increasing, not this knee-jerk reaction. But again, I do think, and I'm recommending to the board that we do go with the $25 a day increase for people who do show up in person. I think if we don't do something, my fear is we're going to lose some of our people. And even if we don't lose a lot of our people at this time, even losing some is going to have an impact on us. And I think just staying competitive with 62 and putting us right in that boat where, hey, we're in that same thing is going to make us keep our normal people. I don't want to go to the 200. I just don't think, again, it's sustainable, and I wouldn't recommend it for us at this time. It doesn't mean we won't continue to monitor what our neighbors are doing, but I think this is a good plan. Additionally, just the question may come up, how does this impact the sub companies we've just approved in the last couple board meetings? So we set the rates for those, and they're currently set so that their employees for swing and parallel get the same rate that our current subs do. We get charged a surcharge on top of that, so to speak, for finding those subs, but the actual amount of money that those substitute teachers get is the same. So we determine and set that rate. So if we change this, then I would recommend changing it for swing and parallel. Obviously, they're not going to fight us on this because that means a little bit more money for them. But I do think it's important that we treat all of our subs, regardless of where they come from, the same, and they get the same amount of take-home pay. I think that's the fair thing to do. They're doing the exact same job. I have talked to Luann about this. We have looked specifically, is this something we can't afford? And because of our lack of sub use earlier in the year, and because there's been kind of a pool of money that we typically set aside for a lot of internal subbing that we do for trainings that we have put off because of the COVID year. We have the money to support this for the remainder of this year. Again, I'm recommending that this is only for this school year. But I'd be happy to take any questions and get the board's opinion on it.
Joel, do you know what we'll call it the fee or the upcharge is to the off the top of your head, just roughly? So if we're paying, if the sub through the third party staffing company is getting paid $145, what are we actually paying? Is it $200?
Yeah, no, actually it's about 30%. So we a little bit. So one of the companies is a little cheaper. We pay about $30. The other company, Swing, is a little more expensive. On the 120, we pay about $35 per day. So this would up it about $8.
Okay. And the reason I bring it up, I know I brought this up to Dr. Olson and a couple of board members offline, that to me that there's an inherent message in we're willing to spend, again, I'm just using rough numbers right now, but let's say it's $175 to the staffing company. We're willing to pay $175 knowing that the person only takes home whatever, $145, but we're willing to pay out $175 through them, but we're only willing to pay one of our quote own people from within Park Ridge or whatever, who's a loyal sub who's been with us for years. We're only willing to pay him $145. And if that sends a bad message or not, I don't know if it does or not, because I understand fully we got to pay a fee, otherwise we wouldn't have the staffing company, right? They're in a for-profit business, they're making money here, so yeah, it is what it is.
I don't disagree. I understand completely. I guess my message to the subs would be, like I said before, our first priority is to use our subs. We go to fill, today and this whole week, and I want to, maybe this is a good time to give a shout out to the building secretaries, the building principals, and to Sue DeLillo, who they're all gathering and trying to figure out and fill the holes for next week, so to speak. But what we've been trying to do is, before we go to parallel or to swing, is we're going to make sure that every one of our people are available and we can use them first. So we're really trying to prioritize the Park Ridge pool of people first.
So any other sort of initial questions for Joel before we make the motion, and then we can talk more about specifics about this? If not, we can, I'll entertain the motion then.
All right, I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the resolution authorizing the administration to raise the in-person substitute teacher rate by $25 per day to a daily rate of $145.
Thanks, Denise. Is there a second? I'll second. Second. Oh, I beat you, Rebecca, this time. Sorry. I wanted to get one on the record. I felt lonely tonight, so. All right, so I've seconded it. Denise made the motion. Is there any discussion about, the motion as presented? Is anything about the number itself, about the philosophy of doing it, not doing it?
I mean, I see Joel's argument that we really need to be competitive with the local market. This might sound like a weird question, but I'm thinking, what else could you do to lure subs to come in? And Eric, you might know, will subs get the vaccine as an educator, or are they in a whole different ballgame? Or you might not even know what that means and what that looks like.
Yeah, so to be honest, I don't know off the top of my head where substitutes fit.
Yeah. Because I wonder, like, if you sub 5 times, you can get the vaccine as an educator.
Right.
Will that get people to, I don't know,
Yeah.
to be a sub?
Denise, the subs are thinking the same thing, though. By the way, I've taken probably about 20 emails or calls about that this week. And same thing that Eric just said. At the moment, we just don't know. But I do think that people are, thinking about that.
We'll promote how cute and adorable our kids are. Maybe that'll be an incentive.
All right, well, any other questions or discussion on the motion as presented? If not, Dr. Olson, Natasha, any comments from the public?
No comments.
Wow, it has been a quiet night.
I know.
Okay. All right, well, then we'll take a vote.
Little,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Biaggi,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Sotos,
Yes.
Dallas, yes, motion carries.
Great, thanks. And Joel, thanks for staying on top of that issue and kind of, having your radar out there to pivot quickly on that, because obviously we needed to pivot quickly to stay competitive. So.
Thank you.
All right, you're not off the hot seat. We have a personnel report. So, but well, why don't we take the motion first? And I assume there's nothing in particular you need to bring to our attention on this?
No.
Okay. Does anyone want to make that motion?
All right, I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the personnel report dated January 14th, 2021, noting that the personnel report is based on the recommendation of the superintendent and not upon the board's direct knowledge regarding any of the specific individuals selected for employment.
Thanks, Denise. Is there a second?
Second.
Fred's got the second. Joel, I assume many of the names on there were part of the, we'll call it the incentive that was in the last
Yes.
PREA contract, because I saw some names that were, long time teachers.
Yeah, I would say, and I think Luann would agree, I think all of them are that are retiring or, pretty much those are all people who've met with us and are taking advantage of that retirement resignation incentive in the rollover contract.
Okay. All right. Any questions from the board? Anything from the public then? Okay, take a vote.
No, nothing.
Okay.
Pearl,
Yes.
Dallas, yes, Little,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Sotos,
Tom?
we can't hear you. I see you're
yeah,
unmuted,
you're
Tom, but we can't hear
you were breaking up.
you.
Tom, can you say it again? Yes?
Yes.
I guess it sounds like a yes.
That sounded like a yes. I interpreted that as a yes.
Is that better?
Yeah, and yes for me.
Yes.
Okay, Rick, motion carries.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, is that for the next 10 motions, Tom?
Thank you.
All right, so motion carries on that. Consent agenda, before we make the motion, is there anyone who needs to peel anything off or wants to peel anything off of the consent agenda and deal with it separately? Okay, hearing none, then we'll take a motion on that. Fred, you're always good at this one.
All right, give me 1 second to open it up. I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge-Niles, Illinois, approve the consent agenda for January 14th, 2021, which includes bills, payroll, and benefits, approval of financial update for the period ending November 30th, 2020, Resolution number 1262, authorizing and directing the permanent transfer of money from the Operations and Maintenance Fund to the Debt Service Fund for debt certificates. Resolution number 1263, authorizing and directing the permanent transfer of money from the Education Fund to the Debt Service Fund for VoIP and copier leases and audio closed recordings, none.
Second.
Great. Thanks, Fred and Denise. Any discussion from the board on that? Hey, Tom, you're we're picking up your microphone.
Sorry, guys.
Any discussion from the board? Okay, and anything from the public? Nope. Okay,
Nothing from the public.
thank you. And we'll take a vote.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Salas, yes. Sotos,
Yes.
Little,
Yes.
Biagi,
Yes,
motion carries.
thanks. All right, and we have the approval of minutes from December 10th.
I move that the Board of Education of Community Consolidated School District 64, Park Ridge, Niles, Illinois, approve the minutes from the closed meeting on December 10th, 2020, and the regular meeting on December 10th, 2020.
Second.
Thanks, Denise says the motion. Fred's got the second. Any edits that anyone sees that need to be made to those as presented, the minutes? Okay. If there's no other comments, and I assume nothing from the public, then we'll take a vote.
Pearl,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Salas, yes. Little,
Present.
Biagi,
Yes,
Sotos,
Yes.
motion carries.
great, thank you. All right, Dr. Olson.
Sure, just two upcoming dates to remind the board that we will have a special board meeting on Thursday, February 4th. And the focus of that committee of the whole meeting will be on special education. And then we will have our next regular board meeting on Thursday, February 11th. And that's all I have.
Great. Is there any new business from the board?
Just the one thing we mentioned earlier is that there's a policy committee coming up with a date to be determined.
Okay. And also the Pandemic Advisory Committee, it sounds like, Dr. Olson, you still need a board representative for that.
For next
So
week.
if anyone, for next week, if anyone wants to attend that, and we can have up to 2 there, right? Before we have to worry about IOMA. Yeah. So if 1 or 2 people.
But also probably not me with Rebecca though, because we're both on the policy committee meeting. So the 2 of us cannot be there together.
True,
So
good
it has
point.
to be, we can't.
Yep.
So January 20th, what time will it be on the 20th?
7
Dr.
p.m.
Oh, 7? Okay. Okay. All right, so if
Anybody?
anyone,
No? Okay.
well, I was gonna, or if, and if not, you can reach out to Dr. Olson directly and let him know if you want to attend.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so if there's no new business from the board, then we, unlike our normal, most of our meetings where we do closed sessions at the beginning tonight, we're going to do, I'm asking the board to go into closed session tonight to, under section 2C1, to discuss specifically the mid-year evaluation for Dr. Olson and contract renewal for Dr. Olson. So that's under 2C1 for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees in the district. So is there a motion to go into closed?
So moved.
Thanks, Rebecca. Is there a second?
Second.
Denise has the second. Is there any discussion about the board going into closed? Okay, and I would just say, just for housekeeping purposes, obviously the rest of administration and staff are released now, and Tony's going to stick around with us for this, and Dr. Olson's going to be in it for part of it, and then the board's going to meet privately with Tony after Dr. Olson leaves. So with that, we'll take a roll call vote to go into closed.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Biagi,
Yes.
Little,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Salas, yes. Sotos,
Yes.
motion carries.
Great, thank you. All right, the board is back from closed session. We were in closed session under Section 2C1 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act to discuss appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees. Specifically, we were discussing contract renewal for the superintendent and a mid-year performance appraisal that the board conducted. So we're done with that. We have no action, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Fred's got the motion. Tom's got the second. Roll call vote, please.
Sotos,
Yes.
Salas, yes.
Yes.
Little,
Yes.
Pearl,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Biaggi.
Yes.
Okay, it's 10:54 p.m. Motion carries.